Yerba mate is a global habit, but most of its cultures are completely unknown. It originated here in South America as a herbal tea consumed by indigenous people for its smooth caffeine, but in the last century it spread around the world in many different forms. This is thanks to three distinct cultural phenomena or historical events that enabled yerba mate's global rise. So, let's dive into these three stories. For the first one, we don't even have to leave South America. There, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay and southern Brazil are the big four of mate countries, located at yerba mate's natural habitat with 70% plus of their population drinking mate daily. This is pretty common knowledge, but most people are not aware that some of the biggest mate consumers outside these are also located in South America, and their story starts quite early, somewhere in the 17th century. At the time, Paraguay and Argentina were not separate countries, they were part of the Spanish Empire, and mate was already a prominent part of daily life in the region. While the cultural integration of the herb wasn't exactly smooth, outright bans and demonization were mostly a thing of the past. Once sourcing and transportation networks had been established, mate started spreading throughout the colonial empire like a wildfire. The primary destinations for yerba mate trade were Buenos Aires, Santiago, Lima and La Plata, the colonial name for Sucre. Although in smaller quantities, the trade also flowed further north to present-day Ecuador, Colombia and even Central America. Among these countries, Bolivia has the longest history with yerba mate. Before the Spanish arrived, the region was part of Guarani territory, the indigenous people who introduced mate to the colonizers. In the Chaco region of southeastern Bolivia, mate was already present in pre-Columbian times, while in the Andean regions, especially around La Plata and Potosi, it arrived with the Spaniards. There are also pre-Columbian archaeological traces of yerba mate in present-day Peru. However, there is no documented evidence of the herb's presence in the early colonial period. This likely means that thousand-mile-long trade networks and extensive knowledge and culture of yerba mate have existed and disappeared before the Spanish conquest. In Peru, it became extremely popular again in the end of the 18th century when 50% of the yerba transiting through Buenos Aires, the main gateway of the trade, was sent to Lima. In Chile, yerba mate was introduced in the early 17th century by the Guarani soldiers sent by the Spanish to fight the Mapuche tribes, and it has remained more or less popular in the country ever since. Nowadays, Chile is one of the largest yerba mate consumers outside of the Big Four, importing more than 4,000 tons of the herb every year. While the fall of the colonial empire, regional conflicts, high taxes and cheap British tea imports have all negatively affected mate culture outside of its area of origin, these countries still account for a significant share of the global market, and they probably represent the largest part of it that still consumes mate in the traditional way. But if yerba mate was such an important commodity within the colonial empire, how could it fail to reach the mother country, Spain? Well, actually, it did reach it, but a different cultural phenomenon had much greater impact in the Spanish mate consumption, which leads us to our second story. At the end of the 19th century, Argentina experienced a massive economic growth, and the construction of railroads and infrastructure required more workers than the country had available. Brazil abolished slavery in 1888 and desperately sought laborers to work on its millions of hectares of plantations. Meanwhile, the two countries became involved in border disputes over uninhabited regions east of the Paraná River, and both governments decided that the way to acquire them was to fill them up with their own citizens. For that reason, they gave instant rights to settle and land to immigrants for free. No surprise, it quickly became the classic land of opportunity to the people of the politically unstable old world. At the time, tens of millions of people emigrated from Europe and the Middle East, and many of them settled in these two countries. For example, Argentina's population quadrupled in 30 years, and more than 30% of Argentine citizens were foreign-born by 1914. In this era, the progressive urban elite sought to embrace European culture and rejected yerba mate as a barbaric, backward tradition. Since most immigrants settled in these large cities, most of them never had the chance to discover the drink. But one particular group of immigrants took a different path: the Turcos. The name was used for people arriving from the Ottoman Empire, but in reality, most of them originated not from Turkey but the Levant, especially present-day Syria and Lebanon. Instead of settling in cities, many of them became peddlers, traveling to rural Argentina and selling goods. And unlike in the urban world, yerba mate remained deeply rooted in the rural areas, which the Levantine immigrants quickly discovered. They began both selling and consuming yerba mate, and eventually they got so deeply into it that they brought it back with them in large masses when they returned to their home countries. Over the past century, a unique mate culture formed in the Levant with its own brands and a ritual that involved stirring the mate with the bombilla, something that is strictly prohibited in the Argentinian tradition. Nowadays, Syria is by far the largest importer of Argentine yerba. In 2024 alone, the country bought more than 30,000 tons of the herb. But they were not the only ones to discover yerba mate. In Spain, the commercial break with France at the beginning of the 1890s has closed off the market to which much of the Spanish agricultural production had been directed. This devastated large parts of Spanish peasantry, forcing many to emigrate. Since Spain accounted for nearly a third of all immigrants arriving in Argentina, and most of them settled as rural agricultural workers, their encounter with yerba mate was inevitable. And just like the Levantines, they brought it back home, making Spain the largest yerba mate market in Europe, a position it holds even to this day. Another small but fascinating story of this era is that of the South African Boers, the Dutch pioneers of the region. After losing their autonomy to the British in a devastating war, many of them chose to emigrate, and some of them ended up in Argentina. There, they discovered yerba mate and brought it back home. Ever since, their mate traditions have survived in small Boer communities in South Africa, thousands of kilometers away from any major mate consuming region. Going back to Misiones province, as both Argentina and Brazil were pumping immigrants there, it became the main birthplace for new mate countries. Polish immigrants escaping Russian oppression became one of the largest landowners in the region, with 800 families farming over 6,000 hectares of land by the turn of the 20th century in Argentina alone. And Misiones happened to have the perfect climate for growing yerba mate, something the Poles quickly discovered. By cultivating the herb, they played a major role in reviving its traditions in Argentina. And while the Soviet era preventing them from bringing mate culture back to their homeland, Poland eventually became the cultural capital of yerba mate in Europe after the fall of the USSR. Immigrants from other countries have also encountered yerba mate. The most notable among them came from Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Italy, Sweden, Germany and Russia. There, a small mate community also emerged when Russian military officers encountered the drink when fighting on Paraguay's side in the Checo War. However, these immigrants either never brought mate back to their home countries, or their influence remained secondary compared to the third and final cultural phenomenon. Yerba mate offers a wide range of health benefits. First of all, its caffeine effect differs from coffee's. It is gentler, longer lasting and doesn't cause a crash. It also contains vitamins, essential minerals and antioxidants, making it effective against a wide range of issues, including nervous, cardiac, urinary and digestive disorders, and just generally improves the ability to perform and recover. These properties of the herb were discovered early on, and yerba mate was already in medicinal use in Europe at the turn of the 20th century. Despite this, it did not become widely consumed until the last 2.5 decades. The Latier family operated a small business in Germany that started producing a yerba mate extract-based beverage called Sekt Bronte in 1924. Initially, it was a niche product consumed only by a small number of people, but in 1998, the Locher brewery bought the license and rebranded it for a broader audience. The new name was Club Mate, and since then, it has gone viral in the German health-conscious nightlife scene, and now it is spreading globally without most of its drinkers being aware of real yerba mate. Nowadays, it is available in more than 60 countries worldwide. Now I began trying Club Mate when I was already drinking mate with a gourd and bombilla, but the only taste they share is a slight smoky flavor. Otherwise, it's more like a better soft drink that is as close to mate as Coke is to cola nuts. In the United States, the Guayaki company began importing yerba mate at the turn of the 21st century. At first, they struggled to reach a large audience, but when they started selling ready-to-drink yerba mate in 2005, success followed quickly. Nowadays, the company claims to control 85% of the North American market, and its canned mate beverages can be found in health stores across almost all countries in the Western world. There are many companies around the world like these two, and most of them seem to strip yerba mate away from its cultural origin and traditional preparation methods. Instead, they market it as a healthy alternative to coffee and energy drinks in the form of tea bags and ready-to-drink beverages. While I don't exactly see how a drink containing sugar and mate in a 2-to-1 ratio can be considered healthy, fortunately, traditional yerba mate has also started spreading alongside these products in the health-conscious Western culture. This is largely thanks to various celebrities, especially football players like Messi and McAllister, who were born in Argentina, or those who discovered mate through their South American teammates. This had a massive effect, particularly on the European market. For example, when the French Football Federation published a video about the daily routines of Antoine Griezmann, where he showed his yerba mate habits, the popularity of traditional mate has increased significantly in the country. This dual tendency, the commercialization of yerba mate in non-traditional forms, alongside the spread of the real deal through athletes and health influencers, can now be observed in almost every developed country. Beyond Europe and North America, yerba mate has also gained traction in recent decades in Southeast Asia, especially in South Korea, Japan and Singapore, as well as in Australia and New Zealand. All of these regions have their own brands, distributors and unique customs, but none of them can compare to the largest mate culture outside of South America, the Middle East. So click on this video to hear their story, it is truly fascinating. Or if you're more interested in how Poland became the cultural capital of yerba mate in Europe, you can check that out in this video right here. Otherwise, thanks for watching and see you in a different Mateverse.